Good morning. Welcome to another session of hashtag LD EduChat Leadership Development in Education. Today we have Anita Davey from ADL who will be looking at outstanding provision within SEND. It'll be a brilliant session and again a really poignant session in terms of as we're heading back into our next phase of returning to school. A lot of the students that fall within this fall under this umbrella, schools have been open for, and this is a thing that people forget, schools have been open to support our most vulnerable, but there will have obviously been an impact. It's how we manage that moving forward, I think, is going to be quite key. So actually looking at an outstanding SEND provision is going to be something that will be the foundation of hopefully as we move forward. Today on Twitter, we have at Chiltern TSA, we've got Hazel Lyons from Puttridge High School who'll be doing our takeover. Do jump on there and share any comments and thoughts that you have. Use the hashtag LDEduChat so we can find your comments easily. Subscribe, hit the little bell at the top. That will give you notifications as and when we have more material. And as I said, we have a lot more coming up in lots of different ways. We've got hashtag LDEduChat that will continue in some form into the next academic year. But more excitingly, we've also got our sibling brand, which is hashtag CPD EduChat, which is going to be CPD by schools for schools. And we're looking for people to collaborate on that, people that want to put together 25-minute sessions that we can share your practice, and that can be from any part of school life. So everything from classroom practice through to facilities, administration, support staff. So whatever your speciality, your expertise is, or something that you want to share, make sure you get in touch with us and we will help you put the sessions together. Anita is very active on Twitter as well, so if you want to find her on Twitter, she's been tagged into most of the posts this morning. Do ask her questions on Twitter after the session as well. Without further ado, let's move straight into our session.
Good morning. My name is Anita Davey and I am a SEND specialist, and it's an honour and a privilege to be with you this morning to share a few thoughts on outstanding SEND provision. Before I start though, can I thank Arv and the team at CTSA for putting on such an amazing CPD programme throughout lockdown and COVID-19. It's been really encouraging to read the comments on different social media platforms about how people have felt challenged, stretched, inspired, from NQTs to very experienced leaders. So well done, team, and thank you once again for inviting me. It really is a privilege to be with you all here today. I know that we've got colleagues from England, but also we have colleagues from overseas, and so a very warm welcome to you all. As a SEND specialist, I have a background in teaching. I've taught all the way from early years to postgrad. I've also been an SEN advisory teacher, so doing statutory assessment on pupils and working with schools to capacity build. I've been an SEN improvement officer and worked also through the SEND reforms in England, 2011 to 2018. I've taught overseas. So I come at this from a kind of a rounded perspective on SEND and seeing it from very different angles. Just to give you a current update, I head up a team, Team ADL. We're a multi-agency national team that supports schools, leaders, academy trusts, federations, TAs and parents and pupils around SEND, inclusion and disability. This morning, I'm going to be talking a little bit about outstanding SEND provision. I'm going to start by sharing my PowerPoint. In talking about outstanding SEND provision, I wanted to look at three components. First of all, what that looks like for the teacher in the classroom. What are their roles and responsibilities? And actually how they make a significant contribution to supporting pupils with special needs and disability. I then want to look at the structure and systems that are in place. But as you can see from the diagram, the role of the teacher is far greater than the systems and the structure. And then the overlap, the point where they connect and that fluidity can happen throughout the setting, is leadership and management. And again, I stress the word "and" because I think too often in SEND, we focus on management and not enough on leadership. And it's when the two come together that we have an effective way of moving forward. This is from the Code of Practice 2015. It's on page 19. It's section 19 of the Children and Families Act. And they form three fundamental principles that we as educators and professionals should adhere to. First and foremost, we need to value the views, wishes and feelings of children and young people and their families. Their voice matters. And this isn't really just about SEND. I do believe that this is a principle that we should uphold for all children within education. We need to recognise the importance of involving them in decision making, particularly when we're putting in place provisions or the decisions they make will affect their futures. So the more we can involve them in decision making, we enhance that relationship and it becomes a collaborative process where everyone around the table has a voice. And finally, fundamentally, we are preparing children and young people for adulthood. And so we have to have that longer term vision in mind. Whilst we are looking at provision in the now, we're looking how we support them in the now, the long term has to be aspirational, thinking around what will their lives be when they grow up? What will they be able to do? How do we increase independence for them? How do we make them, give them opportunities to contribute to the community and find where their skills and talents are? So these fundamental principles are part of the Code of Practice for England. But as I said earlier, this isn't just for children and young people with SEND. I do fundamentally believe that this is appropriate for all children and young people, and this is what we do as educators. So let's start with the teacher. And this is taken from page 25 of the Code of Practice for England. And I think for me, this is the cornerstone. So it starts off by talking around high quality teaching that is differentiated and personalised, will meet the needs of the majority of children. And we will start to unpack what that differentiation and personalisation actually means, because these are words that we use in education, but actually, depending on our route into education, our background, and our training, we all have a different perception of what that actually means. Sometimes when I'm called into lead training in school with leaders and other colleagues, I actually ask them to define differentiation and personalisation. And it's really interesting to watch that actually these are two concepts that whilst we use them a lot, we struggle to actually articulate what they mean. So if we as professionals and practitioners struggle to articulate what they mean, how are we communicating this to parents? How are we communicating this to those new teachers coming in? And this becomes a fundamental of what we need to think about. The second part of this quote talks about, for some children, they will need provision that's additional to and different from. And that additionality is an interesting concept that we need to think about in terms of there's the concept of need and then there's the concept of provision. So as I said, we need to unpack what is differentiation and what is personalization. And as the quote from the Code of Practice said, we need both. So where they overlap, that is where the magic happens. That is where teaching comes to life. Put very simply, differentiation is teacher-led. It's a teacher using their skills, their knowledge, their expertise to understand the child, to know the content which they're teaching, to know the methodology and instruction that's most effective for that content and the child, and put all of those factors into operation within the lesson. Personalization is learner-led. So it's about young people having an aspiration and recognizing that actually there is life beyond school. What is it they're interested in? What is it they want to go on to be? And using that to try and connect to what they are doing within the classroom. And for many children, this is the part they actually find hard because they can't make the connection between the curriculum that they're being taught and where they want to go and what they want to do. So for example, if we were teaching them humanities, I'm not a humanities specialist, my background is maths, but let's say we were doing humanities and they're looking at different researching aspects of history. One of the things that we can talk about is how these research skills will help them in a number of different professions so they can begin to relate to where they want to go. I remember teaching year 3, I beg your pardon, a 7-year-old, and his dream was to be a footballer. And he couldn't see the connection between speaking and listening and the activities we were doing in the classroom around developing those skills and what he wanted to be. Because in his mindset, football was all about what you do on the field. And so what I did is I talked to him about how footballers also need to speak. They do press conferences, they give statements, all of those kind of other elements around the profession. And suddenly, for him, his perception changed to speaking and listening, and he began to engage more in the classroom. This can be done in a number of dimensions, but it is important for us to understand where our learners want to go and what are their aspirations and how we then link that to the curriculum. One of the things on the screen is also about one-page profiles. I am a great advocate of this. Some of you may have seen me speak about this previously. One-page profile is a person-centered tool that can be used in education as much as in the workplace. And it gives us an understanding of who this person is from their eyes, but also how others see them. So the one-page profile asks 3 questions fundamentally. What's important to me? How do others see me? And how best to support me? And this is a tool that we use in education at the start of the year to gauge not just those with SEND, but all children, to understand them more, to see where they're at, and to see how we can enable them to be more effective and independent learners. After the presentation today, I will post out on social media a video that I did around one-page profile. You're also free to look at my own website where I have my own one-page profile that I use when I'm going into schools to introduce myself to leaders and governors. So coming back to this differentiation is teacher-led and personalization is learner-led. And it's when these two come together that the magic happens. Back in 2016, I started to unpack this even further, and I came up with there are 18 different ways to differentiate within the classroom. And I've written small blogs on these. It was part of the Teachers Write a Blog for a Day, so I did it for 28 days, which you'll see why in a minute. So I will again post the link to this blog after the presentation. But as you can see, it's not just about ability. It can be by response. It can be where their seating plans are, by outcome. Questioning. Questioning is a very powerful way to differentiate. Through instruction, through learner role model and expectations. Alternative methods of recording. Again, if we've got children who are struggling to write, but actually have cognitive ability going on, we want to give them every opportunity to demonstrate their learning and their opportunities. Feedback. There are 27 different methods of giving feedback that can be timely, purposeful, authentic, and real. So as we begin to deconstruct differentiation away from this word that we use, we can see that actually we have a lot more tools available to us to support children in the classroom. Moving on to personalization. There are 9 different strategies that we can use to support personalized learning. I talked earlier around the aspirations-led diagram, which is number 2, making learners as co-designers of their learning. And that's very different from investigative model. Co-designing is actually when they're engaged in directing and constructing the process. My favorite though is number 5, decision making. We look into the research of curiosity. Fundamental to this and the research on resilience is problem solving. And I think problem solving is a key skill that underpins our curriculum. Within England, we've gone through a review of our inspection framework, and schools are now required to state their intent, implementation, and impact. And, you know, at the time of this, I was thinking that if I was heading up a school right now, I think my curriculum intent for my school would be around to develop independent and confident problem solvers, because it's one of those skills that you can apply across the curriculum. But again, as I said, the research will show it supports curiosity, so that lifelong learning, and it supports resilience. I've highlighted metacognition because if we look at the Education Endowment Foundation toolkit, metacognition is one of those strategies that is low cost, high impact. So I would encourage you to visit the Education Endowment Foundation website and look up the metacognition toolkit. It's one of those packages that actually takes you deeper into how we can understand metacognition and encouraging children, young people to think about their own learning, to process their own learning, and develop that as a lifelong habit. Teacher research, just to kind of pull all of this together. So back in 2014, Professor Cole and a team of others got together and looked at 200 pieces of research. They wrote a report called What Makes Great Teaching. Again, you can Google this, and they came up with, across 200 pieces of research, 2 factors with the strongest evidence in improving pupil attainment. Teachers' content knowledge. So as I said earlier, the teacher is responsible for directing and leading on differentiation. And that includes their ability to understand how children think about a subject and identify common misconceptions. Most curriculums are a cumulative curriculum. So basically they build one step on the other, a bit like building a house. And if some bricks are missed out, then actually the next step in their learning becomes a challenge. The second aspect of this was the quality of instruction, which includes strategies like effective questioning and the use of assessment. We've already talked about questioning as part of differentiation. But the use of assessment, I think too often we rely on summative assessment and data that is just around testing. But actually, this can be quite varied. And it's when we look at the holistic aspect and look at all the dimensions of assessment, we get to develop an understanding of what's really going on for this child. Where are the gaps? What is it we need to support them with? And how do we move them forward? As an SEN advisory teacher undertaking statutory assessment, I had to look at a diverse range of assessment tools. Some of them came out with contradictory results, and then pull that together to provide an action plan for children with special needs to move forward. I have written a blog on this, and again, after the presentation, I will share this on social media. The second aspect of the research, What Makes Great Teaching, was they looked at specific practices that have good evidence of improving attainment. So challenging students to identify the reason, understanding the reasoning behind why an activity is taking place. This links back to the aspirations, their personalization, and them seeing a purpose to the learning, the curriculum. Questioning we've already talked about, spacing out the study or practice. So this engages this idea of repetition, this idea of giving them an opportunity to kind of, forget, but then come back and actually make those reconnections. So thinking around neurodiversity and all those neural pathways of re-embedding knowledge over and over. And then making students think about, before they start a topic, what is it they already know? What is it they already have knowledge of? So that they're building on previous knowledge. They're building on what they already know and making those intentional connections. As I said, we have a cumulative curriculum. So the more that we can make those connections explicit, we help children develop those neural pathways. Now, all of this links to the graduated approach, and the graduated approach is mentioned in the SEND Code of Practice for England. But actually, the graduated approach is something we would use for all pupils. It's good teaching, it's good practice. Good teaching starts with assessing where the pupils are at. What do they already know? What do they need to learn? We then plan our lessons, whether that's a formal plan or a plan that we have as part of schemes of work. We deliver the lesson and we review it. These are the fundamentals of being a good teacher. But they're also the basics of actually escalating that up when we put interventions in place for children. So my encouragement to teachers would be, if you can actually focus and harness your knowledge around assess, plan, to do and review, that will help you in good stead when you're looking at children with special needs and disability. And finally, the research also showed that common practices which are not supported by evidence is using praise lavishly. We'll all have a different response to how we encourage and how we praise. But children like specific praise. So rather than just saying, oh, you've done a good job, being very clear, what is it specifically that they have done that actually you're encouraging them? Because then they can repeat that and build on that. Allowing learners to go off and discover ideas by themselves. That open-ended learning isn't evidenced within the research as being effective. Yes, it can work in short spurts, but actually as a long-term strategy and a whole school approach, it doesn't actually work. So it's very topic related, it's very subject based, and it needs to be done with caution. I still feel that when we do investigative types of research, we do need to give children and young people a framework. Grouping students by ability doesn't seem to have supportive evidence as well. Part of differentiation is mixing them up. So I talk about the PIPs in the list that I had earlier, and that's around how do we create the small groups within our classroom that will be the most effective for learning this particular topic. And it's not the same at every time. So we've got to be more active around knowing our pupils and then mixing it up, sometimes putting them more able with our children with special educational needs and disability, but also then thinking around how we use additional adults. So in my classroom, I would often set the children off on the work and use an additional adult in my classroom to work with my more able or my middlers. And I would spend additional time with those with special needs and disability by the whiteboard going through a structured task. So we can mix this up. And finally, this concept of preferred learning style is not supported by the evidence. What I would say, though, is that we do have preferred ways of receiving information, so our sensory input. And this relates to our model for learning. How do we think children learn? So here's my very top level model. The learning process in the model is deconstructed further into 7 components. and I don't have the time to do that now. But let's start with sensory input. Sensory input, we take in information from our senses, and there are 7 key senses in effect used in the classroom. That affects then our cognitive process, which is our learning process, which includes memory, language, a whole range of different things. And we use application and transference to develop mastery, and then background to sensory. So I want you to think about, what is your model for learning? Because when I meet a child who's got a learning or appears to have a learning difficulty, I start with looking at what is their sensory input? How is that functioning? I then move on to, let's assume their sensory input is fine. How are they applying what they've learned? And if the application is okay, then we go back to the learning process. So a model of learning for yourself helps you to understand where the blockages or the barriers or the gaps to learning may occur. Moving on to structure and systems. And I've broken structure and systems down into 2 parts, provision and needs. So this is a provision framework. It starts with the bottom, that largest part of our high quality teaching. So fundamentally, it's all the teachers doing what we've talked about in the previous slides in the classroom for every pupil. It's the core offer. It's what a school would define as inclusion. I would say as a leader, it's what I would say to my teachers as these are the non-negotiables. I would expect you to be doing this in your classroom when I walk in. We then have to move on to short-term interventions. So these are 6 to 12 week small interventions put in place, additional interventions, either in the classroom or outside the classroom, to support and move learning on. There are 8 reasons why we would put a short-term intervention in place, and only one of them actually relates to SEND. But quite often when we see a child has not met the expected grade that we want, or that their learning is behind their peers, we automatically assume that it's SEND. It isn't. And this is where we have to really use the data, all of the data, in a coherent fashion to define what it is that's actually going on. Because a gap in learning in terms of the curriculum is very different to SEN. So for example, if a child is struggling with times tables, do they know their number bonds? Number bonds is a fundamental foundation for actually moving on to times tables. If they've got a gap in their learning in number bonds, they're not going to be grasped the times table. If we were then to give them an accelerated program around understanding number bonds and then look at their times table application, we might see that they can actually move on. That is not SEN. That's just a gap in learning. So they would need, as I said, an accelerated learning program. If we give an accelerated learning program to a child who has a defined SEN, they would struggle because what they need is something that's slow, repetitive, structured, and gives them lots of opportunities for repeating over and over. And then finally at the top, we have long-term support. Children who have specific identified needs, who have additionality and require even more support than what we're offering as part of our inclusive offer. I would like to say at this point, it is possible for a child to have SEN and for their needs to be met through high quality teaching and for them to make progress. In my career, I've met many children who have defined need, Asperger's, ASD, but actually the quality of instruction and teaching within the classroom is so inclusive that they are able to make progress without needing additionality. The other aspect of structure and systems is the need. So within England, we talk about the 4 areas of need, and it is not represented as this Venn diagram in the Code of Practice, but it's how I've always talked about it. And the reason I talk about it in this way is because it comes back to this idea of how we use data. How we use data to see the overlaps between different areas of need and then develop a holistic approach for children. So for example, if a child has a learning and cognition need, and a social emotional mental health need, is it the learning and cognition need that's led to the social emotional mental health need, or is it the social emotional mental health need that's lent to the learning and cognition need because of absence, because of demotivation and all of those things? These are some of the challenges we need to unpack when we're looking at the complexity of need. But I do want to stress that the purpose of identification of what their needs are is to work out what action the school needs to take. And it's not just about fitting a pupil in a category. So moving on to leadership, the third element. Leadership starts with strategic planning. And within England, leaders are required to report annually at the end of the year using the SEN information report. They report on the policy. So the policy is a key element of that leadership. And the simpler we can make it, the better, because both of those documents, the primary audience for them are parents. Leadership also involves having a good relationship and understanding and connection with the SEN governor or a trustee, someone who has an accountability responsibility beyond the leadership team in a school, looking at the staff, looking at parents, children, young people. Back when we were looking at the reforms 2011 to 2018, I was asked if I could sum up the reforms in one word, what would that be? And the word I chose was relationships. Relationships are really key in actually ensuring that children and young people get the right provision. We've seen that all the way through this presentation, through the principles, through the conversations, through the questioning. Learning doesn't happen in isolation. So we need to get those relationships and those key stakeholders on board. In addition to this, leadership of SEND would also involve a connection with external relationships, whether that's local authorities, government level, providers, specialist services. There's a whole range of external relationships that need to be taken into account. Management. As I said earlier, this is one of the things I think we focus a lot more on than leadership. But if we get the strategic element right, this begins to fall into place. And there are 5 aspects to this. And one, as you can see, the staff is an overlap between leadership and management. So curriculum, and hand in hand with curriculum goes assessment. The paperwork, tracking pupil progress. And I put this in a different color because I think sometimes we can get caught up in the paperwork. And one of my own missions is to think about how we make the paperwork minimal but meaningful. Looking at what resources are in place, cross-curricular, how we effectively deploy TAs, those are additional adults in the classroom, and how we engage staff. So, outstanding SEND provision happens when all pupils are stretched and challenged. Just to bring it back to where we started, what we've looked at today in terms of outstanding SEND provision are 3 components. First and foremost, the teacher, who has the biggest impact and interaction with children and young people, and they need to be equipped and developed accordingly. We've looked at structure and systems in terms of the provision and the areas of need. And finally, we've looked at leadership and management. And when we have all of these 3 in place, there is a key flow, okay? There's a fluidity of being able to adapt to changing needs, to changing environments, and actually maintaining a system that's healthy and robust. I'll now take questions.
Welcome back. Again, just like all of our sessions, it's always a challenge for our speakers and our experts to condense so much into half an hour of information, but it really gets you, and as the feedback from you has been, it really gets you to distill down the essence of what the topic is. But especially for a topic like this, which is far greater than the half an hour will ever be, Anita has very kindly said that she'll share all the links that she mentioned during her session, her pre-recorded session. So do jump onto Twitter and share that. And the post-session email that I'll be sending out, I'll try and contain the links in there for you as well. So don't worry about furiously making too many notes. We'll send you everything that we can in our post-session communication. Without further ado, let's welcome Anita Davey from ADL onto the E stage. Thank you for joining us. I know it's been a challenging couple of weeks in lots of different ways, as I found out. And so I really appreciate the time that you put in to put that session together, the pre-recorded section together, and the time that you've given us this morning. So welcome, Anita.
So my pleasure. So I've had quite a few. We've had about 12 questions in.
Yeah.
I've answered 6 by text, and I've actually got 6 to do live. So I'm going to try and pull some of these together.
Okay, where do you want to start?
So I'm just going to start with Sophia. Talked about having a child with speech and language difficulties that was assessed by the therapist working at home, and what can you do to support the child with targets while they're waiting for the right provision. So Sophia, a couple of things I just wanted to suggest to you. Who commissioned the therapist? So if it was yourself, just to think about when you're commissioning any therapist to go and do an assessment, actually be clear on what you want them to assess and how that is. There should be a report that comes from it, or you should have a short debriefing before they write the report. So it's possible to have maybe a phone conversation with the therapist and talk through the key things. Regarding speech, language and communication, the Communication Trust is a fantastic website, underused, but it brings together 49 to 50 of all the organizations that deal with different elements of speech language communication needs. There is free training on there for your teaching assistants, for teachers, which is a really good framework. But they also have the What Works, which is all about looking at which intervention is most effective and how to use that. So I would just say, go and talk to the therapist, have a look at the Communication Trust website. If those two don't work, come back and talk to me. Happy to have a chat.
Brilliant.
We've got a couple of questions around trainee teachers and supporting them, particularly around differentiation, personalization, and the mental health issues. So let's take differentiation and personalization first. So we've done a lot of work over the years with NASBIT on the SEND ITT toolkit, so much so that we're now getting NQT providers saying to us that the quality of NQTs coming through is so much higher in terms of their SEND knowledge that we're having to rewrite the NQT program, which is great. But what I would suggest, James, is think around, start with the one-page profile for the trainees to use with pupils in their classes they're training, and then look at the 18 components of differentiation I talked about and the 9 components of personalization. And as I said, I have kind of gone into some depth with this on a blog, which I will share. So we've used that blog to kind of say to the trainees, go and research one element and come back and share with your peers. And then that way they get to cover all of them in a short period of time. Regarding mental health issues and supporting trainees around some of that, I think it starts with a whole school approach. So because everyone has mental health, okay? And I think sometimes we use these terms in a way that actually isn't helpful. Just like we have physical health, everyone has mental health. So we need a whole school strategy on mental health. And then we need to start looking at specific aspects. There are a number of resources that we've grouped together on an open portal that we've put together. So if you don't mind me saying and sharing this, there's the SEND Review portal, so www.sendreviewportal.net. There are 4 pages on there around the 4 areas of need. There's lots on there on social, emotional, mental health that we've used with trainees that kind of steers them in the direction. And there's also a page on COVID-19 resources for teachers to use and develop. In terms of trainees as well, what I would say is the Early Careers Framework, the SEND book for the Early Careers trainees is coming out on September the 11th. So watch this space, it's already on Amazon. It will be going into the 4 areas of need in more depth for the trainees. And I think that will actually take our teachers coming into the profession into a whole new dimension. So I'm hoping that's helpful.
Yeah.
I'm rattling through these. I apologize. I do talk quite fast.
That's
I noticed it on the video. So my apologies.
I'm just going to say, Anita, if you drop all the links that you want to share with your blog and everything else to me, I'll send that out as a post-session email part of that, just so they've got direct access there. Anybody that's joined today, and obviously I'll tweet it out on the Twitter handle as well. Brilliant.
So we've got a question from Indu. It's talking about management and subject leaders to ensure that they have sufficient time to personalize lessons. Time is a very rich premium in education. So a couple of things I would suggest. A couple of years ago, I wrote a book. It's a free ebook, and I'll send our thing on time management for SENCOs. And although it's for SENCOs, the forward is by an NQT. And using the 5 dimensions that are in there that you personalize around yourself, they began to see how they could use their time differently. So I would encourage you to think about the time management and how we think about it differently in education. And you can use the book to apply that too. But looking at, the actual cost question that you've raised, for me, the 1-page profile is really powerful. And if it's done at the beginning of the year, say in tutor groups, then actually those 3 questions are quite succinct. And it's really the first and the last one that teachers and subject teachers need that they can build into their lessons. Because the first question is, what's important to me? And that helps develop relationships. So if a young lad says, what's important to me is going to watch football every Saturday with my dad, it really forms an opportunity for Monday morning lesson. This young man walks in, how was football on the weekend? Immediately you've developed a relationship. The last question is how best to support me. And that really does give teachers a real steer and signposting of what young people and children feel, this is what I need. And I've had children sometimes say to me, Miss, I get it, but I just need a bit of time to think. That's such good feedback, because what that's saying is, what differentiation method works for me is give me time. So if you ask me a question, I just need a little bit longer to think about it. Or I've had other children say, Miss, how best to support me? Please don't sit me next to X because they make me talk. That helps your seating plan. So you're beginning to personalize from their perspective. I think the one question that we do need to keep asking the children is about their aspirations. What is it they want to do when they grow up? And then we can link the curriculum in whichever form we have to that. Now, it won't happen every lesson, but if at the back of the mind you know that you've got someone who wants to be an apprentice builder and we're teaching angles, well, that's a great opportunity to bring in, you know, when you're actually building, think about the angles in a building, think about the angles that you have within a room. And so immediately they're beginning to connect what they want to do with the way they want to go. So it's not about a quick fix, it's about creating a culture where we actually look at the interaction and the pupil voice working in tandem with the teacher.
Yeah, I mean, just to tag on to that. So, just from a leadership perspective, what message would you send in general, but obviously specifically with what the situation's been post-lockdown, as we're now entering that phase, to leaders in terms of what could they be doing differently to make sure that this is supported?
So, obviously, going back, I know some people are calling it the recovery curriculum. I like the word reconnection curriculum.
Yeah.
I do think we've got to think very clearly about what we want in the curriculum going back, and we're going to have to drop some stuff. Okay, we're going to have to think about what are the things that we really need to teach, the core bits, and how do we make space for relationship building, for mental health, for PHHE, for community. Children are going to come back with different levels of need depending on what's happened to them during lockdown, and that can be that they've experienced direct bereavement, but it could be that they've been in a small environment, like a small flat, cramped, you know, not had much room to go out, maybe not had a garden, you know, all of those things that kind of we sometimes take for granted. So it's important. One of the things I've been supporting leaders as they've been taking children back is they've sent out questionnaires to the families and actually asked them key questions of what's the one thing you want us to know that happened to you during lockdown, your highs, your lows. Did you experience any bereavements? We need to know because they may not be within our school community. But if someone's grandparent or aunt or uncle has died, we need to know. And it may not be that they've died of COVID-19 necessarily, but any death is traumatic. And a death, particularly during this time where people haven't had the opportunity to say goodbye and do a proper funeral or whatever service they do as part of their end of life process, that has actually affected a lot of people as well. I would also say, ask children what questions they have. What are the questions that they've got on their mind as a result of what they're seeing in the world? We need to have those conversations. They are uncomfortable at times and we don't have the answers. But again, we need to be able to say to them, I don't know. So these are the things I know. These are experiences I've had in the past that helped me through. And these are the questions we don't know, but that's okay. And giving them that space is what we need to create going back. And that's what I'd say to leaders. Rethink it. You know, don't worry about the logistics of the teachers and all that. I think the core thing is to think about how we're going to create a new culture. You know, we all talked about the new normal when we return. What's the new culture in our schools as we return? Okay, we've got a question on, let's go, interdisciplinary intervention is necessary. So pupils who face mental health problems which affect their academic performance. Should pupils be evaluated in the same way as other students when facing obstacles in their studies? I don't think it's about assessing them or evaluating them in the same way. With the 4 areas of need, one of the things I think we've got into a bad habit of is we kind of see it as segmented separately. And if you saw there, what I put was a Venn diagram and was looking at the overlap. This isn't how it's presented in the code, but it's how I've always looked at it. So what I would say is look at all the data you have, all the information you have on a young person or a child, and actually use that to holistically understand. As an SEN advisory teacher, I would go into schools and assess pupils, and sometimes the assessments would come back that would contradict each other. That's okay, okay? But what you then need to do is actually look at some of those contradictions and do a synthesis of that data. So I don't think it's about evaluating them differently. I would say assessment should be holistic, and then the analysis and synthesis of that data should be holistic. So looking at the whole child rather than just they've got a mental health issue, we're only going to look at that, or they're not performing academically, we're going to look at that. Pull that together. What can you see? Because that will help you understand the reasoning behind that and where you move forward with the intervention.
Who do you want to jump to next?
I'm going to Laura and talking about setting by abilities, not support by research. You agree? So you've got poor reading ages and using small groups. Would this approach, which you agree could classify as a long-term intervention? Starting off, you need to understand whether the intervention is having impact for that group. And it starts by making initially, I would say, a short-term intervention. Okay, start by a short-term intervention, 6 to 12 weeks. If you're not seeing progress within 12 weeks, okay, that intervention isn't working. And we need to rethink how we got the right intervention. Within 12 weeks, I would expect, so 12 weeks is about 3 months. For a reading intervention, I would expect around 5 to 6 months progress. If they only make 3 months reading age progress in 3 months, that's just chronological development. There is no impact of the additional 2 and different from. So you might start off with your small group, keep reviewing it, but actually, as I said earlier, there may be different reasons why they have or need an intervention. So using that intervention and the data you're getting from their involvement in the intervention to understand, is it really an SEN? Is there a cognitive issue that's stopping and impeding their reading? Is it a gap in their phonics? A gap in learning is different to an SEN. So maybe they've just missed out on some elements. It might be a sensory issue. I went into a PRU and there was a year 9 boy who was on letters and sounds phase 1. And those of you who knows letters and sounds phase 1, it's all about discriminatory sound. He barely could get to CVCs. And for 4 years, he'd been on the same intervention program. So he'd got bored and kicked off, hence he ended up in the PRU. When I went through his records, no one had done a hearing test. No one had done a working memory test. And actually, when we unpicked it, fundamentally, he had hearing difficulties and a working memory issue. That's why he was struggling with phonics. So the strategy he needed was very different to others who had similar assessment scores. But giving him the same intervention year after year after year, he got bored because there was an ability there, but there were just 2 elements that were missing. Yeah. So think it through and use it. Don't quickly just jump to a long-term strategy. How do you use your short-term strategies to understand the child more? If you need more on this, come back to me, but that's, I think, a brief summary of what I could do right now. We've got a question on funding, which seems a very popular question.
Yeah.
Limitations on funding and high needs block list, increase of SEND coming through. What does the future look like and how can schools future-proof? This is not new, okay? The increase of SEND and the complexity of SEND has been part of that, and get alongside the tension of reduced funding. This is why I think it's important for SENCOs, those who lead on SEND, to be looking at capacity building. Okay, capacity building comes back to that triangle that I talked around provision, being very clear on how you recognize that everyone in the school is part of Team SEND. They're all a part of your team, and how and what do they contribute to that? Capacity building is possibly around thinking how you shift some of your assessments over a 5-year period in-house, how you build up skills, because if you've got some of the key assessments in-house, you're then in a better place to respond much quickly in terms of assessing the people and then putting the intervention in place. So I think you need to think about strategy for this and how that links to a 5-year plan, and look at how you are capacity building, not just reacting or responding to the current needs in your class or your year groups at this point in time.
Here we go. We've got a more practical based question from Beverly down at the bottom there.
Thoughts on forward-facing seating when the children? Yes, yeah, it's a challenging one. From a practitioner-teacher perspective, I am not keen on the forward-facing model. I remember once I had to go in and observe as part of the local authority visit, I had to observe an MFL lesson, and they were all forward-face sitting, and that was my first reaction. How can you have conversations? I think it is a challenge, without a doubt. I think, you know, going forward, there are lots of guidelines going forward, and this is kind of some of the micro detail. And what we're seeing is leaders are planning, and then the next day the government brings out new guidelines and they're having to change everything. So I think, you know, as leaders, we need to think about, in this time, say July and early August, what is it we really need to focus on and plan, and then leave some of the detail to nearer the time. Because there are so many unknowns in this. There are so many unknowns. If you do end up forward facing, I think you need to have a conversation with children about that. There's a lovely lady on Instagram who's been using Lego to explain a lot of the COVID issues to children through Lego pieces and photographs. Again, I will send the link. It's on one of the pages that I will recommend. And I think some of those images might be useful in explaining that actually this is only for a short time because of where we're at, and we do have to sit all of this way, but actually what we want to return to eventually is this group sitting. So actually they know that it's coming down the line and that this isn't forever. So yeah. I would say use Lego. Not that I've got any shares in the product, but
I think the challenge will be, I mean, what's definitely for me been highlighted over the last few months is that all of a sudden people have realised that we've got vulnerable students and students with special educational needs that are within our mainstream schools, which over the last decade or so we've lost a lot of the specialist expertise that we can devote time to, either in mainstream or in other establishments as well. And what this situation under lockdown has really highlighted is the fact how important those specialist teachers are. I mean, what are your thoughts on that in terms of the gaps that we're moving back? Okay, whether it's recovery or reconnection, but the ones that are at the extreme end,
yeah,
really needed that specialist help.
And how we do that. So we put in, so my team, we put in a bid, just so you know, to Innovation UK to look at supporting schools during the recovery period of COVID-19. There are 8,000 bids, as you can imagine, and whilst we scored highly, we didn't actually get the bid, but we are still going ahead with this. So there is something coming out soon of how schools can be supported around some of this. All I would say is watch this space. I can't divulge it now, but we're looking by the end of July, early August, we will be sharing this with schools so that we can support schools through this, because as you say, there are the most complex needs that we need to do. I do want to pick up on Richard's question. I know we're at time, but sixth formers, Richard, can you connect with me offline, because there is, for post 16, there is a lot of, I can direct you to a specific website, and we're doing some stuff in September going forward to support post 16 practitioners, enable sixth formers and going forward. So happy to chat with you offline if that's okay. But yeah, it's a really important question because it came up yesterday on another forum.
I mean, especially moving forward in terms of we've had our current year 11s who are going to be issued grades.
Yes, yes.
And they are now going to be going into a setting which isn't what would have been classed as a normal post-16 setting, whether it's to do with the hours that they do, whether it's to do with attendance, all those different, which for students that don't have these educational needs is going to be a challenge potentially anyway, especially if they're changing settings, changing from going to a sixth form college, for example. If they're going to a sixth form college and having to adapt to that, and they've got educational needs.
Yeah, and I think, so we are doing a lot with sixth forms, and it's been going along, and there are resources that we can tap into. But I think, you know, whether it's sixth form, going to sixth form, year 6 going to 7, we need to make something of the class of 2020. And however you can celebrate the class of 2020 so that they can feel that this is a milestone transition point in their life, then actually we can take that to support them going forward. I think it's not just the academic side of it, it'll be the psychological, that they've not had that milestone that most people need. It's a kind of rite of entry, isn't it? It's that kind of, we've gone through that. And some of them may agree with their grades that they've been given or disagree. And again, it's about making time for those conversations to help them move forward and to say, okay, well, you disagree with that. What can we do next? What's our action plan? And I will keep coming back to these one-page profiles because, you know, we've used them at sixth form, we've used them in employment, and I think they form a good starting point for relationships. There are 12 person-centered tools, but the one-page profile is the anchor one that you can use the other 12 with. So again, that might be something to look into, and I will add that to the list that I'm making here for everyone. Can I just add, during COVID-19, it has been very busy for us. I offered 30-minute free coaching to Senkos. It was full on, and we still have that open. So if there's any specific, you get a lot done in 30 minutes. As you can see, I talk quite fast, which I'm learning to slow down, sorry. But if you want to take advantage of that, please feel free. You can book online, and yeah, I'll try and fit you into my diary. Although I do need a summer break for a little bit as well.
Yeah, I mean, definitely in terms of on that note, we need to be fit and able as well to be able to do the best for our students. So in terms of a lot of the people that have been working with our most vulnerable and students, they've been working constantly since lockdown, because those are the students that in general, either if they've been able to come into schools, they've been coming in with key workers. And if they've not been able to come in, having to do some kind of remote learning with them, I think that there's a challenge. And I think the actual staff have taken that burden of well-being, because they need to be strong and fit. What advice would you give just to them in terms of what they need to be doing between now and September to make sure that they are fit and able to do their job to the best ability?
SENCO wellbeing, or SEND leader wellbeing, is absolutely critical, and we talk a lot about that. I would say first find out what helps your wellbeing. It will be different for different people. Arv and I both have a passion for cooking. Cooking for me is a really great, it feeds my well-being. I feel really not just physically nourished after it, but I like the process of cooking. I love ironing. For others, that would be the biggest nightmare, and it wouldn't be their well-being. They would need to go for a walk or a run, or, you know, figure out those things. I would also say, are you a morning person or an evening person? You can't do both. And I think sometimes we try and burn the candle at both ends. So I'm a morning person, happy to get up early, but I switch off at 5:30. I do not do any work after 5:30. If you're the other way around, then don't get up early. Kind of figure out what works for you. There isn't a one size fits all, but invest in your well-being. And it is about the oxygen mask. You put it on yourself first, because if you go down, you can't help others. And which is why I've said, I'm happy to fit in people for the coaching, but I also am going to make some time to just take some time out, because you have to. You have to invest in yourself.
Absolutely. I think my one takeaway there is that you said that you liked ironing.
I'm not doing anyone else's.
I'm sorry. Cooking, yes, I get that, but nobody likes ironing.
I love it.
Nobody likes ironing.
I do.
No, I refuse to believe that. I think you've convinced yourself you like it because you.
I tell you why though, because in my job it's always ongoing. We never see an end product. Whereas with the ironing and the cooking, I can see something that I've completed and it's there. So yes, no, ironing works for me.
There is a satisfaction there. And I think that in itself, I think, is a really good thing to focus on, not just with SENCOs but just as teaching professionals in general. We're part of such a journey with our students, no matter what their personal challenges might be, is that seeing that end product isn't always as apparent to us in teaching. Because, okay, they might get the GCSEs, but you've been part of that journey. They might get their A-levels, or they go on to apprenticeships or whatever. We don't really get that end product. To actually find a passion or a hobby that gives you instant gratification, I think, is really important. So maybe the summer is that time.
Yes, definitely.
For me to pick up that guitar that I've had for over 10 years and perhaps learn how to play it. So if anybody wants to give me virtual guitar lessons for free during the summer holidays, please connect with me.
Well, over the lockdown, I was enhancing my chess playing skills.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, absolutely.
I love chess. So.
Yeah. So there you
go. So I think, we do need to look at our students, and I think the provision that's been provided in all the stories I've heard against all the odds has been, from an effort and ambition point of view, has been really, really good. And I think the staff that have delivered that and try to maintain that connection with students over the last 3 months, again, I think has been driven with passion. And I think moving forward into the next phase, I think our leaders need to make sure that we take the golden nuggets, the silver linings from the situation, say, this is what our professionals can do when they're given the time and the space to do it. Not forget that when we're rescheduling our reconnection with our students in September, and making sure that actually happens rather than just talked about. I think we are coming to the end of the session. Is there anything else that you want to finish with, Anita?
John Gibson also likes the ironing. But no, if any of you have got burning questions, as I said, I am going to keep some of the coaching times available. There will be specific times we're closing down. But if you need to get in touch, you know where we are, happy to chat. Please don't feel any questions too small. That's what we're here for. We know what it's a tough time for everyone, and the more we pull together, the better it is for everyone. And at the end of the day, it's about our children, young people. It's not about you, it's not about me, it's about the children, young people. We want to give them the best in life. That's what we came into the profession for, you know, and so that's what we're about. So feel free to get in touch.
Thank you. And thank you for the time that you've given us today and for putting that session together. So thank you, Anita. Really, really great session. I think feedback already has been brilliant. I'm a little bit concerned that I've got so many people on this session that like ironing. I need to rethink our audience and participation in these sessions.
Great audience.
I don't feel comfortable with this, but Marion, we do share a passion, which is the Grand Prix, and I should have been at Monaco this year and that didn't happen. But ironing whilst watching the Grand Prix or a film, to be honest with you, let's just stick to watching the Grand Prix or watching a film. Ironing, buy stretch clothes. We're in lockdown, you don't need to iron at the moment, no one's going to see you. Just iron, just hang the top half and that'll be fine, which is what most of us have been doing. So that's the end of another brilliant session, and I'm so glad that we managed to slot in this session on SEND and introduce Anita to you. Anita's been working within our trust and other trusts and schools around the region here for many years, and has really helped improve the provision that we have within our schools against all the odds of budgets, of time, retention of staff, all those different things. But to actually maintain, as Anita said, the focus is that we're here for our students and to provide that provision for us to the most needy of our students on an ongoing basis. So brilliant session, one to take away, and I'll send out the links to you after the session when Anita puts that massive document of links together for me.
Okay.
And do carry on the conversation. I see some of you put your Twitter handles on there. Anita will respond to anything. I know she will do on Twitter at Chiltern TSA. Use the hashtag LDEduChat, connect with Anita, and I'm sure she'll share with you any resources she can today before I send it out to you tomorrow. Do share this with colleagues. That's going to be the way forward as our time becomes even more precious, and especially going into the summer period where it needs to be a little bit more fluid what you do and how you do it. Look after yourselves during that period. Chiltern Teaching School Alliance is the YouTube channel that you need to subscribe to. Make sure you hit that little bell at the top. That will give you notifications as and when new content is loaded. And as you would have seen on Twitter, and as I've mentioned, we've got hashtag CPD EduChat, which is going to be CPD. It's going to be your CPD, basically. You're going to provide it for everybody that wants it. And we're going to help you do that over the next academic year. We've already got a huge lineup of topics that are going to be shared with you. They're all pre-recorded, so you can watch and learn. They're all nugget size, so they're going to be about 20 to 25 minutes long that you can just drop onto your phone and watch it in a break, or when you've got 5 minutes spare, or when you're ironing. I mean, if you're one of those people that likes doing that, yeah, who am I to judge? If you want to do that, go ahead and do that. And more details will follow. Jump onto the Eventbrite page. The link for the mailing list is out there. If you haven't received it as an email from me, do give us your feedback about our current sessions, but also what you want moving forward. That mailing list will be used to contact you regarding what you want out of the CPD EduChat and whether you want to contribute as well. So lots happening in the next week and a half. It feels like a crammed week. Just before I do go from today, though, I just want to highlight those people that are NQTs or got colleagues that are NQTs or know of NQTs that are joining the profession from September. We have two special events next week. On Monday, we have a welcome conference for secondary NQTs. And details will be found online. And we also have a primary NQT welcome conference on Wednesday, which we will be hosting as in Chiltern Teaching School Alliance will be hosting. It's free for you to attend and connect with people. Collaboration is the way forward. We need to do it, and we need to do more of it and continue to do it moving into next year. So this is me, Arv Kaushal, signing off on another session of hashtag LDEduChat, Leadership Development in Education, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.